Welcome to the Wealth Done Differently Retirement Podcast. Danielle Howard, a certified financial planner, shares insight into the financial tools, techniques, and temperaments needed to make the most of your retirement dollars and relationships. Danielle bridges the gap between Wall Street and Main Street, bringing complex financial topics down to earth. Danielle will educate and inspire you as you define and refine your version of prosperity.
Hello and welcome to Wealth Done Differently Retirement with Danielle Howard, a certified financial planner. I could not be more excited today. The podcast today, we have a special guest, and her name is Lynne Twist. And I'm going to give a little bit of background about Lynne before I bring the ladies on. This is just absolutely amazing to me. So for more than 40 years, Lynne Twist has been a recognized global visionary committed to alleviating poverty, ending world hunger, and supporting social justice and environmental sustainability. From working with Mother Teresa in Calcutta to the refugee camps in Ethiopia and the threatened rainforests of the Amazon, as well as guiding the philanthropy of some of the world's wealthiest families, Lynne's on-the-ground work has brought her a deep understanding of people's relationship with money. Her breadth of knowledge and experience has led her to profound insights about the social tapestry of the world and the historical landscape of the times we are currently living in. Good morning, ladies. How are you?
Good morning, Eric.
Good morning. Good morning to all of you. Wonderful.
Yeah. Lynne, reading this is just absolutely amazing. And I know that you're also an acclaimed author, and I'm going to let Danielle speak to that in a moment. But I want to thank you so much for being here because I am really excited about the content of this podcast and what we're going to be talking about today.
Well, thank you. It's my honor and delight to be here.
And Danielle, thank you so much for bringing her on. I know that you know a lot about what she's done, and I want to hand it over to you. And can you talk a little bit about the book that she's written and kind of some of the work she's done?
I don't know how The Soul of Money ended up in my hands, but it changed the course of my business practice and my personal relationship with money. You know, alongside the 2,400 verses in Scripture that talk about how money can be used as it weaves its way in and through our lives. Lynne's book, The Soul of Money, was just incredibly impactful on me. She shares many, many stories and the three truths about money that we need to combat with the three lies of money. This book has now been translated into 9 languages, including Korean, Chinese, Vietnamese, French, Spanish, German, Japanese, Bulgarian, and Portuguese. I am just amazed at the impact that not only her words, but her work is having all over the world. And I'd like to start today, Lynne, would you share, as we're talking about the idea of hospicing retirement, as it has become known, that you're supposed to draw this line in the sand and sail off into the sunset dressed in white linen with a cocktail in your hand, pulling money out of various resources. And you brought the idea when we met. I brought you to Aspen this summer for a Lead with Love conference to talk about the relationship people have with money. And you talked about the idea of hospicing retirement. And it was incredibly powerful. And I was hoping today we could maybe start with one of your stories that you share in The Soul of Money with your time with Mother Teresa and the couple that you encountered. Could you share that story with us and maybe how that planted some of the seeds in your movement in hospicing retirement?
Oh, gosh. Well, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you so much for having me on this podcast. And I hope I can, I'll address the question rather than answer it, because the experience I had with Mother Teresa and the couple who interrupted our very holy meeting changed the course of my life quite dramatically in all kinds of ways. And I'll just give you my my condensed version because I could take a couple hours to tell that story. So I was working very very devotedly, you could say, almost in a way that was passion beyond what you can imagine, on ending world hunger. And that takes you to India. If you're going to end world hunger, you spend a lot of time in Africa, all of sub-Saharan Africa, and India, the Indian subcontinent, where we had a lot of operations for the Hunger Project, lots of work that we were doing there. And I was raised as a Catholic and always thought I would love to just be in the same room or presence or world with Mother Teresa. And I had a friend in India, her name was Indira Koitra. When I shared with her how much I loved Mother Teresa and admired her, she said, well, I know Mother Teresa. I can arrange a meeting. And I just kind of was stunned. Then 2 years later, really, back and forth to India many times in between, I contacted Indira in Delhi and just to say hello. And she said, well, it's so funny you're calling me. Mother Teresa's here in Delhi at her orphanage for little girls. I'll see if I can arrange a meeting tonight. And she did. She arranged a meeting for 7 p.m. So I did everything I could to get myself spiritually and emotionally ready for meeting one of the great icons of our time. And when I arrived at the area in Old Delhi where Mother Teresa's orphanage was, one of many in the world, there was a courtyard, and then there was 2 steps leading up to a doorway, a modest doorway, with the sign of Mother Teresa over it, the Missionaries of Charity, with the famous blue and white sari, a picture of a nun, blue and white sari, that they all wear. And so as I was approaching the door, there was a crumpled piece of newspaper on the step. And I'm a trash picker-upper everywhere I go, and that's a big project in India, I can tell you. And I picked up this, thinking it was trash, and inside there was a tiny, tiny, tiny baby girl. It was the smallest human being I've ever seen in my life. She was the same size as my hand. She was obviously very, very premature. She was still breathing, and she was alive. And she was in this crumpled up piece of newspaper that I thought was trash. So that was my first shocking encounter with Mother Teresa's world. And I took this little tiny, tiny human being and wrapped my shawl around her, and then walked into this orphanage. And there were 39 cribs, iron cribs, with 3 or 4 little baby girls in each crib, and then like gymnastic mats on the floor with many more babies. There were babies, all little girls except for one boy. And the nun who opened the door, I handed her this tiny, tiny little baby, and I said this was on the doorstep. And she rushed the baby into another room and said, Mother Teresa's not here. I know you have a meeting with her, but she's gone to the jailhouse to bail out some young, beautiful prostitutes who lost their way, and hoping that they can come here and help us with the children. Maybe while you're waiting for her, you could help us yourself. So I said, of course. So she gave me an apron, and I lined up along a sink, a line of sinks with other volunteers and beautiful nuns. And it was an assembly line of bathing these little tiny, beautiful baby girls, most of them deformed with a missing finger, or they were blind. They had been given up because they were not perfect. And often in India, just a perfect little girl is given up because boys at that time were much more valuable. So I'm washing these little babies in the sort of assembly lines, and the nuns are singing, and I was in absolute and total bliss, I must say. Even though I wasn't meeting with Mother Teresa, I realized I was meeting with Mother Teresa, that she often said, I am my work, and this was my meeting with her, this exquisite work. And I must say, and it's hard to believe, that I did not hear a baby cry. Now that seems impossible, probably isn't even totally valid, but I do not remember ever hearing a baby cry. And there were dozens and dozens and dozens of babies. Wow. But it was so beautiful. And then there was this moment where someone tapped on your shoulder and said, she's here. I knew who they meant. And I put my apron down and walked to a long, skinny hall. And it wasn't really a meeting room. It was a hallway. And there was a wooden table with 2 chairs. And I sat down on one of the chairs as instructed. And then I looked down this long, dark hall. And here comes a Labrador retriever, an old, a little bit crippled dog with a kind of a gray beard. and this was her dog. And behind the Labrador, her beloved dog, was Mother Teresa, also bent over with gnarly feet in her sandals. She was so small, so tiny, that when I stood up and walked toward her, I towered over her. So I immediately knelt. And when I knelt down and kissed her hands and held her hands, I was the same height as she was. And she put her hands on my head and said, "Bless you, my child," and then took my hand and led me over to this table with the wooden chairs around it or next to it. And we began a kind of an encounter that was the most holy, loving, exquisite experience of humanity, of love, of God. And I was in tears the whole time. I don't remember anything that we said. We were just holding hands, and I was just moved beyond belief in a space of absolute unconditional love. And then there was a loud, tussling sound behind me, loud voices, kind of angry voices, and an aroma, a very, very strong perfume. And these two very large Indian people barged into our sacred meeting. And the man was a Sikh. Sikhs wear big turbans on their head, and they have usually very heavy beards. And he was a stout man, very large, very big, very tall, very wide. And he had a big topaz in the middle of his turban. And I remember this, he had this huge belly with a kind of brocade kurta, which is the Indian dress, over his big belly. And he had a ring on every single finger, including his thumb. Very garish, over-opulent, overdressed, overweight, overbearing man. And his supposed wife, who was also very, very large. She was wearing a very opulent sari. She had diamonds in her nose, and a diamond going from her nose all the way to her ear, a kind of a chain of diamonds. And she was overweight, overbearing, overdressed, over made up, over perfumed. They were over everything. And they were loud and bossy and rude and obviously super rich. And they came barging into my meeting with Mother Teresa and said to Mother, "We didn't get the picture you promised." And they didn't say hello or anything. They just said, "We didn't get the picture you promised," with a kind of angry voice. And Mother Teresa came to her feet, and the woman handed me an Instamatic camera. This is back in 80 something, a little Instamatic camera. And then they pulled Mother Teresa between them and on the other side of this pretty narrow hallway and gave me the Instamatic camera. And this woman said, "Take the picture." There was no greeting, no warmth, nothing, just cold order, bossy, take the picture. So I took the picture of Mother Teresa in between these two monstrous people, little tiny Mother Teresa. And then the woman did what I considered to be almost so horrible, I can't even tell you about it practically. She put her hand underneath Mother Teresa's chin. Mother Teresa was by then, osteoporosis had her very, very bent over, and her head was bowed. And she put her hand underneath Mother Teresa's chin, and she said, "Chin up, Mother, we want to see your face." And she went and kind of forced Mother Teresa's chin up and told me to take another picture. And I did. And then they stormed away. They didn't say thank you. They grabbed the camera and they left. And my blood was boiling. I hated these people. And I really, really, it was just like I was infuriated. How could they treat her that way? How could they be so rude? And I sat down, and Mother Teresa sat down, and we continued our meeting. And she was fine, but I was not. And my blood was boiling, and I was tense. My body was all knotted up. And then Mother Teresa completed the meeting and gave me a scapular medal and blessed all the people in my family. And then I left. And after hugging her and thanking her and walking through the place where the babies were and saying goodbye to all the nuns that I'd been with, and got in the car. And on my way back to my hotel in New Delhi, it was about an hour drive. And I had to actually calm down. I was so upset. My body was just shaking with anger at these people. By the time I got to my hotel, I was calm enough to realize that for Mother Teresa, everyone is Christ. She saw Christ in every face. And she saw Christ in those people. She was not angry with them. She was not upset with them. I was. And she was fine with them. And then I sat in my hotel room and was crying, and I wrote her a letter, and I said, I received the greatest teaching of all, Mother Teresa, that I've ever had in my life, when you were so generous and kind to the people who were so rude to you. And she wrote me back. And she said the most amazing thing. She said, Lynne, you are naturally drawn to the underserved, to the underprivileged, to the needy, to the marginalized, to the left out. You will always serve them. But your circle of compassion needs to expand to the wealthy, to the entitled, to the rude, to the arrogant. And she said, the vicious cycle of wealth can be as painful and as intractable and as blinding and as horrific as the vicious cycle of poverty. And it's your dharma to help people of great wealth to find their soul, to find their center, to find ways to soften and open their heart again, because their heart is hardened and they're in a vicious cycle that you can never understand. But you need to include, expand, awaken your circle of compassion to include the very wealthy. And it was from then on that I realized, as a fundraiser, which I was at that time and still am, that I had a bigotry, a prejudice. You might say a reverse prejudice from what's some of us are always working on. I shut those people out, and not anymore. Now I see how important it is to deal with the burden, the blindness, the vicious cycle of wealth, and to see Christ in those people too.
Okay, I have tears coming down the same way I did when I read that in your book. And that story profoundly changed my practice as a certified financial planner and as a life planner. You know, the goal of probably 95% of investment managers is to help people build more and more wealth. And that story so shaped the trajectory of my work and impacted me to say it is so much more than just building up bigger barns and having more. And you talk about enough, and you talk about living in the beauty of our enoughness every day. And as I have continued to look at where I have been placed in the Roaring Fork Valley of Colorado, with Aspen at one side and Vail at the other, and the clients I've had opportunities to walk alongside in looking at what money means to them, and knowing that it is a flow of their intention, and that money can be used as a tool throughout your life. And our financial services world and the media, you know, tells people that it's about getting to that retirement line in the sand. And so as you look at, you know, hospicing retirement, the idea that it isn't about stepping over that line in the sand, and you are walking the walk. You are completely engaged in the world. You are bringing your unique skill sets and your story to the table to share with people, and you continue to be vulnerable in your work. And I see you as such a inspiration on what it means to truly flourish in life in your second half. And I aspire to do that myself. But what words of wisdom can you speak to our listeners on, you know, heading into that second half of life, and how to grab a hold of living it to the fullest?
Oh gosh. Well, thank you for that kind assessment of me. I'm not sure that I can live up to what you just said about me, but anyway.
You're living it.
Well, I'm not someone who will ever, quote, retire, in other words, stop working. So that's just not a goal that I have. I think it's a wonderful goal for other people, and it's just not one for me because I'm what I call a pro-activist, not an activist, but a pro-activist, an activist for, not against. And that doesn't mean I'm not interested in unraveling that which stands between us and the world we want. But I'm not against it. I'm interested in hospicing its natural unfolding and disintegration, because that which is unsustainable is dying. And structures and systems that no longer serve us are falling away in society and civilization. And if we hospice them, they'll die more gracefully. They've served us, certain ways of the economic system, old outmoded kinds of education or governance. These things that are no longer working, they're dying their natural death. We don't need to attack them or kill them. We need to hospice them so they gracefully let go. While we midwife the structures and systems that we now know will serve us, and now that we understand our relationship with each other and the planet at a new level. But that's also true in one's life. It's true in the civilization in which we're living, but I think it's also true in your life, that you start not being so interested in things that when you were younger really captured your attention and even became, your agenda. And to let those things fall away naturally to younger people, to your children or grandchildren or the people who work with you who are at a different stage of life, and not try to hang on to things that are no longer yours. That's the process I'm in with Pachamama Alliance, the organization that my husband and I founded. We're in a process that some people probably would name it succession, but we don't call it that. We don't want to try to find somebody who will replace us because we're not going away, but rather we call it continuity, continuity and continuation, and making this phase of our life as the kind of wisdom keepers of the Pachamama Alliance and the wisdom keepers of our family to actually recognize that we want to ensure the continuation or the continuity of the values, the sourcefulness, the ethics that we have held dear, but allow that to be expressed in ways that are more fitting for the generations that follow, that are more appropriate to the new and unfolding story that we're living in. And so with your own financial resources, and I know that's really how you work with people, I think it's true with that too. If we're all about amassing enough because we're terrified we're going to run out, then we're so self-absorbed and so kind of focused that the flow that we've enjoyed perhaps, or the flow that we now enjoy in our life of resources that flow to us and flow through us, they get kind of caught. There's a wonderful metaphor that Brother David Steindl-Rast uses, and he talks about the Sea of Galilee, and how the Sea of Galilee is this beautiful, beautiful body of water that is fed by the wonderful river, that's the River Jordan. And it has birds and flowers and fish, and it's flourishing, and it's just a gorgeous, gorgeous body of water. But then there's that same River Jordan feeds the sea, another sea that has no fish and no vegetation and has no life, and that sea is called the Dead Sea. And it's the difference between these two bodies of water is the Sea of Galilee gives what it receives. It passes it on. The Dead Sea does not. There's no outflow to the Dead Sea. And I think when we're in our later years, philanthropy and continuing to allow the flow of the ethics and moral compass that we've lived with and what we care about to be, even if it's small, an important part of what we are continuing or that continuity that we care about. I think that's really, really, really important, particularly in the final chapters of one's life, because it is your relationship with the long-term future of life. And we are you could say, in the large continuum, in the long game, we have ancestors that we are the fruit of a blossom on that lineage. We're alive now, and the people who follow us will be the next fruit on the blossom of that lineage. And we want to be responsible for completing things that you don't want to be passed on, inappropriate habits, addictions, anything that's been abusive in a family lineage. But we do want to pass on the ethics, the grace, the beauty, the clarity, the wisdom that is ours to pass on. So this is a time of discernment. And money is the energy that we can use to express, or actually use as a conduit, a current for our expression, our love. That's why it's called a currency.
The currency. Well,
Yeah.
and I see that as when you're talking about what things do we need to hospice, what things do we need to end, and looking at what your vision of your legacy and moving forward. So how do you use your money, whether it is to, invest in companies that you believe in, that are serving the world, that have good corporate cultures, or understanding how money is coming into your life and you use it wisely for the purposes and the intentions. So not only is it about philanthropic work, but to me, it's, we can take it in so many different more directions in truly understanding in this fall season of life how to best use the resources that are coming into you, and how to decide how much is enough for your own personal lifestyle or liquidity, and how do you want to educate the next generation on whether it's your values or how you want to be philanthropic, or to use that flow of this currency to continue the good stories, to build on the good stories, to build on your wins. And again, what you talk to is hospicing, letting things die that need to die, that are no longer serving us. I personally feel that the traditional idea of retirement needs to be hospice, that it is dying, because people are living longer and they have so much opportunity to continue to share their gifts, their skills, their passions, their time with the world, with the wisdom that they've gleaned over the years. And how do they use the financial resources wisely, and what's changing around that? So I so appreciate, your stories, your vision, your stepping into your authenticity and your truths to live that out. Again, I think it's such an inspiration for so many, and I hope we can have another conversation at another time. We've got our time limited today. Is there any, just as we wrap this up, any additional pieces that you would want to share with our listeners, or how they can get a hold of you? I know your website has several different webinars and courses that people can take on how to have healthy relationships with money. Can you share how people can get a hold of your team, whether it's the Pachamama Alliance or the Soul of Money Institute?
Yes, I'll just say pachamama.org, Pachamama, Pachamama, that means Mother Earth, Pachamama. .org is the work we do with the indigenous peoples of the sacred headwaters of the Amazon, and then conscious, committed people all over the world for the sustainability of life itself. There's a whole world there, courses all over the world, 88 countries, on bringing forth an environmentally sustainable, spiritually fulfilling, socially just human presence on this planet, which is the mission of Pachamama Alliance. And then the Soul of Money Institute, you can go to soulofmoney.org or lynnetwist.com, and there's all kinds of wonderful, juicy things there too. And then I also work with the Nobel Women Peace Prize laureates, the women who won the Nobel Peace Prize. And that's Nobel Women's Initiative, nobelwomen'sinitiative.org. So those are my kind of three main ways to get in touch with me. But I did want to say one other thing. There's such an important aspect of elderhood now, I think, because of the information age. There's so much information and so much knowledge available at the fingertips of every living human being now, like never before, as we all know. And it's kind of doubling seems like every minute, but doubling every year, every few years. And so people who are actually wisdom keepers, like people like you, Danielle, and myself, who've lived for decades, our presence in the world is more important than ever. Wisdom needs to be brought forth to balance the enormous power of knowledge and information. So people in our stage of life have never been more important to a healthy civilization. And we're not smarter than or anything than younger people. It's a peer relationship now that's probably the first time in history. I can barely turn on my television without my grandkids, but they lack the depth of soul and wisdom that I know they must have to be able to deal with the onslaught of information that's available to them as they engage in the digital world and everything else that's coming their way, artificial intelligence, augmented reality. So we have a really important role, and we can't retire from that.
Right.
Ever.
Yep. Very excited about that aspect of it. That's my inspiration. First it was my kids, and now it's the grandkids. And to see how fast the world is changing, and that we have such a vital role in it. It is a calling. And I thank you so much for our time. Again, I hope we can do it again. I know our paths are going to cross again soon. And people can reach out to me at www.wealthbydesign4u.com to continue this conversation on how to, look at your financial life, to have a good relationship with money so you can experience and fulfill your place and your calling in life. Thank you so much for our time today, Lynne. I'm truly honored to have you, and this has been wonderful.
Thank you, Danielle. I love talking to you anytime. Anytime, as much as possible.
Lovely, lovely.
Okay. Thank you.
Eric?
Yeah, I will tell you this. I am so glad I didn't have to talk earlier, because when you have a lump in your throat tightens. Yep. And it's really hard to talk. I mean, that was absolutely beautiful, an amazing story. And I kind of want to end on one thing here. A quote comes to mind as you were talking about not being a succession plan. And I know Danielle also subscribes to this work beyond her, right? It's not her work. She's doing what she's supposed to be doing, and she's equipping people for the next generation and the next generation and beyond. And for you to say that, it really brought to mind something that we talked a little bit about before the podcast, and that's that my wife and I used to work at Boys Town, and Father Edward Flanagan was the gentleman that founded Boys Town back in 1917, and his quote fits exactly the mindset that I hear from you and Danielle on a consistent basis. And the quote is, "The work will continue, you see, whether I am there or not, because it is God's work, not mine." And he died in 1948, and Boys Town is alive and well today. And I know that your organization will be alive and well in 100 years, and 150, 200 years, because the mindset that you have and the impact that you're making it crosses time, because it's not your work. And I appreciate that about you. And I thank you so much for being a guest on Danielle's podcast today. Danielle, you picked a winner. I'll tell you that. It was what a great podcast.
No doubt. Thank you.
All right.
All right, Lynne. Well, we will talk soon and have an amazing time. I know you're getting ready to head back down to the rainforest and enjoy your time with grandkids and all that spring brings to fruition for you.
All right. Thank you so much.
And for me, Lynn, thank you so much. And for everybody listening today, thank you for listening to the Wealth Done Differently Retirement Podcast with Danielle Howard. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. That way, when Danielle comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Again, thanks for listening today. For everyone at Wealth Done Differently Retirement, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Wealth Done Differently Retirement Podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Wealth by Design, LLC. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. Danielle Howard, Certified Financial Planner, is an investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities offered through Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer, member FINRA SIPC. Cambridge and Wealth by Design, LLC are not affiliated.